as provincial departments battle to place some pupils in schools for 2023, there are also concerns that migrant learners may be deliberately sidelined. Now, according to Article 26 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, everyone has the right to education. Patriotic Alliance leader Gayton McKenzie is on record, for example, saying that children of undocumented foreign nationals should not be placed in public schools ahead of those born to South African parents. So let's bring in a senior attorney at the Center for Child Law, Liesl Muller, joins us via our video link this morning. Liesl, thanks very much for coming on. We're asking the question, when we discuss this issue, it should be quite simple. What does the law say? I've already told our viewers exactly what the Universal Declaration on Human Rights says. But then the irony, and this is in response to what Gayton McKenzie had to say about undocumented migrant children. The irony is that out of the estimated 1 million undocumented pupils that the Education Department has reported in 2019, 80% of them are South Africans.
Yes, absolutely. That is correct. And let me just start with the law and then get to what you've just now raised about South Africans. So not only does international law, of course, guarantee the right to education, but even our Constitution, the Constitution of South Africa, Section 29 tells us that everybody is entitled to a basic education. And there has been case law on this, which tells us that when the Constitution says everyone, it means everyone. So this means that whether you are undocumented, whether a child for any reason does not have the required legal documents to be in the country or study in the country, they must be able to go to school. So that is clear in the law. There was a recent case which the Center for Child Law collaborated on with the Legal Resources Center, which was with a school called Pakamisa in the Eastern Cape, where there were children who were not being admitted. And the court found there that every child must be admitted to school in line with the Constitution. And following that case, the Department of Basic Education released a directive which confirms this. So the position in the law is not complicated, it's very clear. Yeah. And yes, even in that Pakamisa case, when we interviewed those children ourselves, we found that definitely more than 50% of those children were South African children.
So as you say, the law is clear, and yet when we go online to register our children, you can't apply. You can't proceed with the online applications process unless you have a whole range of documentation.
Yes, and this is definitely not in line with the law. The department will have to change its online system to bring it in line with the law. So it will, for instance, require you to provide an ID number. And in the past, that did not even allow the children of refugees or asylum seekers, for instance, to apply online. That, I understand, has been changed. But when there is no ID number, that is still a problem. So the department will have to change that. That would definitely bring, if somebody had to bring a case against them, they would definitely lose that case. And that, I think, is the problem when we have to bring cases to court to enforce the rights of a child. It will often take years, and we don't want that. We want the department to act on their constitutional duty to implement the right to education.
But as it stands, they're not doing that, right? And when these cases do come up, organizations like yours, the Center for Child Law, as you say, these things first need to go to court, and it's not a quick process. It's a very lengthy process, and the children are still not in school for the time that those court cases are underway. So what happens in the interim, Liesl?
Well, particularly at this time of the year, obviously, we get a lot of requests where children are not allowed to be in school. What we then need to do is contact the school, provide them with a directive from the Department of Basic Education, tell them that they cannot refuse any children, and then they do get admitted. Okay. But that is still problematic, right? Every child who is denied access should not have to come to the Center for Child Law. What I think is needed from the Department of Basic Education is to ensure that every school and every principal is aware that they cannot tell children to come back when they have a document.
Right.
I find that schools do not know about this directive. And I think that duty falls on the department to ensure that schools know about this. I also find that schools might know about the directive, but sort of like take a chance, send the parent away, see if they come back with a document, and then say, okay, fine. But I must tell you, with the cases that I deal with and that we deal with at the center, those cases are very complicated documentation cases. It's not the case that children and parents are just flippant about not being documented. Let me tell you about the cases with South Africans. Of course, the Department of Home Affairs in this case is the bigger problem, because the legislation there does not, for instance, allow single fathers to register a child where the mother is, for instance, deceased or unavailable, when there is no DNA test. Now, a DNA test is incredibly expensive, particularly in light of the levels of poverty that we see in this country. And a granny, for instance, or an aunt would not be able to register a child without the help of a social worker, and then still it becomes difficult. Of course, you have orphan children whom we do not know who the parents are. So those are all kind of children that will be undocumented. And those are the kind of children that we need to assist. Firstly, of course, the Department of Home Affairs must document them.
Yeah.
But in the interim, they must go to school. And of course, in the long term, they will be part of our society, and they should be able then to be able to find a job and be a part of society without having to then rely also on the government.
Yeah.
So it's a very long-term project.
Yeah. And as you say, that's the important takeaway here.
Mm.
As families try to get their documents in order, the children, no matter where that process is, the children need to be in schools. I've got several articles here in front of me, Liesl, where reporters have spoken to parents who were turned away from several public schools because of this issue of documentation. They say that some private schools will take undocumented children, but their fees range from 500 Rand to 1,500 Rand a month, which is unaffordable, as we know, to many families in South Africa. This issue of schools perhaps knowing what the legislation says, but still trying to circumvent it. How do we address that?
I think we need to make clear, and I think this is an overall problem, that the status of the parent and the rights of the child are two completely separate issues. When the child has the clear right to education, right, the parent's status is frankly irrelevant to that right. Nothing prevents the Department of Home Affairs from arresting and even deporting parents who are undocumented. And that is the duty of Home Affairs. Schools need to know that they do not need to implement immigration laws on behalf of Home Affairs while using children. Once we realize that, it's not difficult. We think about it. The only reason why we need a birth certificate is to know how old is the child, so that we know which grade to place them in. So what schools need to do is, if they can in any way determine the child's age, and if you're worried about who the child is staying with, because you can't tell the parents, you can get an affidavit, which is what is the case under this directive. An affidavit explaining why the child is undocumented, who the parents are, and perhaps, if you like, what's being done about it. And then, as I say, the Department of Basic Education needs to make a bigger effort to circulate this information. And perhaps also the Department of Social Development needs to circulate this information to their social workers. Of course, if any parent organization wants to take a school to court, that can also happen. As I say, not ideal. I also think that people who speak publicly in the media, politicians and otherwise, need to be incredibly careful with how they address these issues. As we know, we suffer from a plague of xenophobia, and we do not need to include children in that. And yes, so that is, I think we need to raise awareness, and that I feel is mostly the job of the Department of Basic Education.
And I think the most important takeaway from our conversation this morning, Liesl, is that the status of a child the documentation of a child insofar as access to education is neither here nor there. Children need to be in classes. And a message to parents who are struggling with this morning, perhaps, is for them to get in touch with an organization like yourselves, the Center for Child Law. Liesl Muller, let me thank you for your time this morning. An incredibly important discussion. All of us have seen the numerous children that are not in school, standing on the side of streets, begging. It's such an important message that these children need to get into classrooms, and their documentation does not matter. Liesl, thanks very much indeed for joining us.